All right, let's get to the players themselves, Logan. And Adam Peters was stunned that he had the ability to pick Johnny Newton, number 36. I can't say I was stunned only because there was a foot injury that caused some concern, a Jones fracture, which is a really serious foot injury. But Newton ultimately there for the Commanders. They take him at 36. Based off the tape alone, it seems like a great value. There's some people that thought he was neck and neck for Byron Murphy, who some people had as the best defensive player in this draft. So to get a guy who's that good at 36 seems like a great pick. But for those that are wondering more about Johnny Newton, what did the Commanders just draft?
Yeah, so, in terms of my evaluation, again, we just talked about how that's kind of like, not worth anything because it's about the Commanders' evaluation. But, he's a guy that I liked a lot. I had Byron Murphy ahead of him by a margin. I had Byron Murphy in that kind of, what is that, 12 to 20 range, in my opinion. And then Jer'Zhan was probably 25 to 35, and so I did have him as a first round player, and I just thought he had to go to the right situation. So when he was there, I was like really surprised because I think when you watch him, he uses his hands well. He plays really hard. He's got a good feel. He gets a lot of, I don't say junk pressures, but he just plays so hard. He like falls into stuff, which is awesome. He pursues the football well. He doesn't have like this elite bend. He's not elite twitchy, but like it's really, really good, And I think like when you kind of package it all together, how hard he plays, the hand usage, the kind of pass rush feel, coupled with like the plus athleticism. Again, it's not plus, but it's pretty good. I just see a guy like, I'm really excited to see how they use him on the defensive front. Like I just think about last year when Duran rushed from the outside a little bit and how that created so many mismatches along the offensive line. Like, is that a guy that can also do that? Can you line him up over the tackle, get a bigger body type out there, compress the pocket, and use these three kind of special players, not just as rotationals and kind of like hockey subbing each other, but as a way to kind of create mismatches along the front? I think so. And I think like, again, you wanted to get better, more dynamic pass rush. I think he does this for you. And again, I think the floor is very, very high with him because of how hard he plays and because of his leadership. And again, like he's a guy that's going to try to get better. He's got a chip on his shoulder now, right? Because he wasn't taken in the first round. It sounded like he thought he should have been taken in the first round. So I'm really excited. And it's just, I'm also excited because I do feel like this defensive staff here and now is going to have a more creative way to develop these players and a more creative way to deploy the players. And so I can't wait to see with a talent like Johnny Newton, like where this ends up going.
Yeah, a lot of people, I did a couple of hits with our hosts and everything over the weekend, and the first question is like, well, what does it mean for John Allen? And they play the same position. There are three techniques, like on a baseline level. It doesn't mean they can't play together. You can creatively use those guys together for sure, whether that's three down fronts or whether that's lining up double three tech. That's something that some teams have done recently, create some different angles, some different ways to attack certain gaps, whether it's run, pass, etc., all that kind of stuff. So there's ways you can do it. But I think on an even more fundamental level, like John Allen is getting obviously up there in age, and he battled an injury all of last year. It'd be really nice to not have to play John Allen 85% of snaps, which it felt like you had to do the past bunch of years. Yeah, you're paying him a bunch of money to play a lot. And I'm not saying John Allen needs to play half the snaps, but dang, it'd be really nice to be able to sub him out a little bit more to get the best of John Allen. And then, yeah, in a couple of years, like he's going to be, I can't believe this already, but like John Allen's damn near 30 years old. Contractually, if they want to, just the facts of the case are he's got no guaranteed money left after this year, so they can move on if they want to. But I think even more on that short-term Logan, like the ability to get more creative and maybe kick John outside as a rusher sometimes to potentially just not have him on the field as much. It's not necessarily, there's John Allen's replacement. Long-term, realistically, yeah, he probably is. But it's also a John Allen like current maintenance plan that gets me excited about what John Allen can do this year, nevertheless what Jer'Zhan Newton can do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like one of the things when I talk to some of my defensive line clients that are around the NFL and just in terms of how they approach utilization along the defensive line, it's like, oh yeah, we want to, like this team that I'm with, they want to rotate as much as possible. Like one of the major advantages for the defensive line is that you don't have to play every snap. Offensive linemen do. So why don't I get the fresher, more productive, more explosive player out there as much as possible. And again, like I agree with you. I think one of the reasons John's production waned a little bit last year was because he was just playing too much. Like he can't be the best version of himself when you're on the field all the time, right? That goes for a lot of positions except for O-line. So I would say like having this piece in there, again, I think Ridgway's a good player. We haven't seen Phil kind of develop, but having just another piece in there that says, hey, John, we don't have to like here we'll give you a blow on first and second down, right? We'll let the young buck in there and play the 3 technique, or John Ridgway's in there, and just giving them more opportunity to keep their legs fresh, take the pounding off their body. I think that's 100% the right approach. And so I do think it makes the football team better in the short term. I think it makes John Allen better in the short term. And also, is it a contingency plan moving forward? I have no idea. Jer'Zhan Newton, as much as I like him as a player, might just be a guy moving forward. And that's fine. You need guys, right? He might just be a guy. But he also could develop into someone that you say, hey, we can replace John Allen with this player. So I'm not gonna speculate on John Allen's future because John Allen is shown.
We don't know. I mean, we don't know. John Allen might not be that good in this scheme. He might be the best version that we've ever seen. We don't know.
We don't know. And so I think yes, is that a possibility? 100%. But I also think in the immediate impact of this player is awesome. Right?
Yeah.
We get to rotate our guys more. We get to be more creative with rush packages. We added another explosive playmaker, hopefully, and we'll see how it goes from there. So I 2 years from now, 3 years from now, I don't know. I've seen guys get drafted that are supposed to be the second coming of whatever, and that's just not who they are. That's just not who they are as a player. That's not who they are as a person, and you have to kind of adjust accordingly. So, we'll see what goes on. I hope the best for Johnny. I think he's going to be an excellent player. Hope the best for John. I think them working together is going to be great for the team. So,
yeah, it's going to be really fun to watch how creative they want to get. Mike Sainristil is the next pick that they made. And by the way, we'll probably get through the second and third rounders today, and we'll look at some of the late round guys in the UDFAs later in the week on the show. But Mike Sainristil, guy that I definitely had circled because of the character reasons. And, we talked about this the other day, but like Tirico, who knows the Michigan program really, really well, came on our show, and I was like, of all these guys, especially, Colson, Sainristil, these guys that you're looking at second, third round, is there one that stands out as a Dan Quinn guy, as a guy in Mike Tirico who lives in Ann Arbor but has covered the NFL, and Dan Quinn for, as long as Dan Quinn's been in the NFL. And he's like, Mikey is your guy. And sure enough, I think you see it on tape. You watch the press conference, which I did, the conference call that he had with our colleagues in the local media, and just his personality, the personableness of him, but also the competitive drive. Like, it's all there, plain as day. And I think this is also a really intriguing pick, Logan, because to me, this answers one of the questions I've had, which is, what do they think of Quan Martin? Or how are they going to use Quan Martin? And it would make sense to me that if they're drafting Mike Sainristil in the second round, Quan's going to be playing a good bit of safety this year, and Sainristil is going to wind up being their nickel guy. And then you obviously have Chin to play with as well as kind of that big nickel, et cetera, in terms of the machinations of the secondary.
Yeah, and I think when you look at Dallas and what they did such a good job with kind of those, multi-safety sets, kind of position, almost like the basketball thing, positionless basketball. You know what I mean? Like, are you a linebacker? Are you a safety? Where do you fit? Are you in the post? Are you in the box? Are you a run support player? Are you blitzing? And you've got guys in Quan and Sainristil. We'll see. Obviously, like with the young guys, I'm always a little bit tentative to anoint them as the second coming. Like, his film's amazing, but we got to see it at this level. But then you got like your Percy Butlers, these kind of bigger body athletes that can kind of do a bunch of different stuff. That you mentioned Jeremy Chin as well. Like, I think it's going to be really cool. That's one of the things I'm excited now for the offseason, is just how do you use that player, that skill set in conjunction with Quan, who is arguably one of our better defenders, not arguably, was one of the better defenders on the team last year, especially down the stretch. So, Quan, I think, is an interesting guy because he played outside, he played inside, he played safety. That was one of the alluring parts of him when he came here from Illinois last year. So does he bump outside? Does he come back inside? Is he a box player? He's the Buffalo nickel. Mike Sainristil did play a little outside at Michigan. I don't see him doing that, but I think you get a lot of flexible skill sets. And with a coaching staff that has shown, through their time in Dallas, obviously Dan in Seattle and Atlanta, shown they can be creative. I'm just really curious to see what they end up doing with these guys and how they best utilize all these different football players. I mean, because that's really what they are. They're not DBs. They're football players, and they're really good football players. So that's going to be something that I'm really, really excited to watch over the course of OTAs, minicamp, and training camp. Is what shape does this thing take? What packages are they used in? Because you could draft Sainristil and have him be kind of like your 3rd and 10 nickel player, right? Or your kind of sub nickel player, right? And Jeremy Chin could be in the box, and Luvu could be a defensive end, and Bobby Wagner could be on the sideline, and you could just. And then maybe the other 3 rushers are defensive tackle. You could do a bunch of stuff, but we got to figure out who is best at what. And it's still so early in the process. But I think the ultimate thing I come back to is you get a guy in Sainristil, and you talked about like his football characters like off the charts. Like Saban said the same thing: best pound for pound player in the country type of stuff, right? And when you watch the film, that's what you see: a guy who can blitz, a guy who can tackle, a guy who's got great coverage instincts and great footwork. So I say to myself, I want him on my team. We'll figure out how to use him. And I really think it kind of falls in this bucket of, we're not drafting for need. We're drafting best player available. And I think he was the best player available at the time. I think it was the same thing for Johnny Newton. And I think you just get two really good football players that fit your kind of pedigree and what you wanted to identify in terms of people. And you say, we'll figure out how to use them when they get here.
He is the most Commanders player on the board. Like for what they want the Commanders to be. And all the things that we've talked about with the character and why they love Jaden and why they love these other guys that we're talking about. Like nobody embodies that better than Mike Sainristil. And I think I heard it was Nate Tice talking about the Brock Bowers pick that I thought he made a really good point on the Athletic Football Show, where he said at first you're like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense because you don't really need a tight end. You just drafted Mayer, like, what are you doing? But there's so many times that we do that on draft day, then a year later, we look at what a team could have done, and it's like, oh, they passed on the best player available who's now killing it somewhere else. They should have just taken the best player available. And that's why you do it, is because the league changes so fast. And, a year from now, Chin's on a 1-year deal. Maybe they look at Forrest and Butler, and they're like, these aren't our kind of guys, which I have no reason why they'd think that based off what we know of them necessarily going in. But, like, who knows? That's the point. The point is we don't know what it's going to be a year from now. What we do know is on the board in front of us right now is this guy that we think is a really, really talented football player that is the ultimate character guy from what we want. So just take him. Like, don't overthink that, where are we going to play him? Nickel, outside? What does that mean for this guy, that guy? Like, yes, you need a plan. And I think that, the classic like Puka Nacua example of what happens when you have a plan for a guy, and that plan, that's the best possible outcome of having a plan for a guy. But at the end of the day, if you've got a glut at a certain position, and unless it like quarterback and what Atlanta did with Penix is a whole different conversation. Yeah. So take quarterback out of it. As long as it's not quarterback. And
honestly, even with that, like, I kind of get it. You know what I mean? I kind of get it, but like we'll talk about that more on a different show.
Yeah, we can talk about that on Thursday. I think it's I get what they're trying to say. It's an indefensible decision. But anyway, like
I'm going to defend it. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, outside of quarterback, don't worry about having too many of a good thing. We've seen it too much in the NFL, and Mike Sainristil is the obvious correct pick there for them. At 50. Ben Sinnott, 53. Now we get to have the football discussion about him, the Kansas State tight end / H-back / everything. He lined up in the slot, he lined up outside, and I thought it was really interesting that Adam Peters invoked Kyle Juszczyk's name. He said he blocks like Kittle too. He blocks like both those guys, but it does feel like this could be his Kyle Juszczyk, who he takes in round 2 here. What do you see from him on tape, and how versatile can he be in the NFL?
Yeah, first off, I don't think anybody blocks like George Kittle, but I do think like when
I didn't say it. Adam Peters did. Yell at him, Logan.
Yeah, I'm with you. But I think the thing about Ben Sinnott is that I understand the comparison with both those guys. So like when I first watched Ben Sinnott, I had the same exact idea. I was like, this is Kyle Juszczyk. He's a guy that can play fullback. He can line up outside. He can beat linebackers in one-on-one situations. Because the cool thing about having a guy like that on your roster, right? So like Kyle, what makes Kyle Juszczyk such a wonderful chess piece is that defenses have to match that personnel with base defense. Unlike two tight ends where they can match you in nickel, if you have a fullback in the game because of run fits, you need to add another run defender. So if he wants to, if Ben Sinnott can play that H-back, fullback, tight end hybrid role, it's going to do wonders for your run game, like right off the bat, right? And then you say, well, now you've matched in base defense, and now I have a player in Ben Sinnott who I can line up in the slot or line up out wide, and I have a very high degree of confidence that they can beat a linebacker or a safety in one-on-one situations, right? And again, like he's got to grow and develop into that role, but I love that pick because of that reason. And then when you go to the Senior Bowl, I think this is one of the benefits of going to the Senior Bowl and seeing these athletes there, is he blocks better in line than I thought. Like he didn't really do it a ton at Kansas. Like not that he couldn't do it, but he didn't do it a ton. But seeing him block big ends and like throwing his face in there and playing with that physical edge and then running his routes and able to create some separation at the top, like because his route tree at Kansas State was kind of like these seams and, you know, kind of languid corners, which worked for the concept, but you didn't see the suddenness, right? And so I saw a more sudden mover. I saw a guy that was competitive in the run game. I saw a guy that was physically tough. And again, if he can grow into that role that Adam Peters described, physically, he looks like he can. Like physically, like right off the jump in terms of how they used him in college, it's not like a big jump, but talk about a piece that would be awesome in terms of dictating matchups with personnel, dictating responses from the defensive personnel, and a guy that I think has significant pass game upside. It's really exciting. And again, you look at what Zach Ertz brings as a receiver, and this is something totally different because of the down and dirty approach that you get from that player. It forces different adaptations from the defense. So it's a very exciting pick, I think, a guy that I liked a lot coming out. And I think, you know, people say, oh, well, look, Logan, you had Jared Wiley ahead of him, right? But I think for what this team needs and the way he described the role, taking him here makes 100% sense because Jared Wiley doesn't fit that role. Theo Johnson doesn't fit that role.
No.
This is the guy that fits that role.
I also think it's interesting because for as much as people associate like 10 personnel with Cliff and people are like, they need more receivers, and they obviously got one, but they need more receivers because they're going to be 4 wide. It's like, no, as you look at Cliff's last 3 years in Arizona, they played in 12 a lot. And the funny thing about Sinnott is, like, when he's out there, are you in 12 or are you in 21? Like, that's the beauty of it, right? Like, do you count him as a fullback?
He does have enough pass game upside, I think, to kind of be in that kind of even 11 range. You know what I'm saying? It's a very unique piece.
But as a defense, like, you have to make that determination, which is exactly what you were saying, right? Is like, is he a fullback? Like, we don't know before they break the huddle. We can't really, have a linebacker and a cornerback waiting there to see whether we should match with our nickel or go to base. So we probably treat it like 21 most of the time. But that's the thing. Is like Cliff used 12 personnel a ton. And Sinnott now gives you even more versatility within that 12/21 personnel because of who he is. And I think Cliff will definitely lean into that in the ways that Kyle Shanahan has with Kyle Juszczyk. So, just adding to kind of that chess piece thing, because people don't associate that kind of stuff with Cliff. Like, I actually think Cliff has shown that already, and nevertheless, will continue to evolve with that here in Washington.
Yeah, 100%. And again, when you watch him in 2021, like Max Williams, the guy from Minnesota, he went to Minnesota College. He was drafted by Baltimore, but they used him kind of like a fullback. The problem with Max Williams is he's like 6'6", like 265. So some of those insertion blocks, some of those counters were just tough for him to move around and make those blocks. And I think with Ben Sinnott, because he's a better athlete, he's a little bit more compactly built, he can do that stuff a little bit more reticently. So maybe that package expands, So again, I think it's a wonderful pick. I think it fits the role, especially when you describe the role. There was no better player in this draft to fill that role, and I see the value there in the second round for sure.